Welcome everyone to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshop. Tonight we are thrilled to hear from Stephanie Sorrentino. Stephanie is a pediatric speech-language pathologist and the current business development director at North Shore Pediatric Therapy. And I will let her introduce herself more. So I'll turn the time over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Kimmy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Apparently, this is a popular topic, so it sounds like everybody's a little bit fed up. Feeding is a huge area of need in the autism world, so I'm happy to cover some basics for us tonight. Like Kimmy said, if you could just type your questions in the chat as we go through the presentation, and I can reference them towards the end when we stop recording, just so we can respect privacy. And just in case, we can't answer everybody's questions, we may have a record and we can reach out to you afterwards. So just some housekeeping. I am an NSPT paid employee, and we are a proud donor of the Chicago Autism Network. I also volunteer on the events and planning committee, and I do community outreach. So just quick housekeeping there. Today, we're gonna learn about pediatric feeding disorder, which is a very new development in the field. We actually didn't have a diagnosis code or an actual diagnosis something to specify a pediatric feeding disorder. We're going to talk through fundamental feeding milestones. We have some special indicators for autism and feeding, which professionals you might need on your team, and then just some basic strategies to improve your child's feeding experience. So a quick disclaimer, there is limited research on feeding in general and also on feeding and autism. The important thing to point out is that there's never a one-size-fits-all approach, except for that the team should be multidisciplinary. We really need to make sure that we are looking at our children with autism and making sure that we're looking at all their profile of sensory, motor, their skills, their social emotional development, and we need the expertise of a group of professionals, not just one person. And high quality feeding intervention starts with high quality assessment. I forgot one bullet point here, which is no parent shaming. It's my #1 rule. So you're here, you're ready to learn. If there are things you learn, there's no shame in that. And that's why education and organizations like the Chicago Autism Network are crucial for our communities. So why are we talking about feeding today? So children with autism are 5 times more likely to have feeding difficulties. This next statistic just strikes me. 74% of children with autism also have feeding difficulties. Only 3% of those children with feeding problems, only 3% are behavioral. Something really important to keep in mind when we're struggling. Is there something else going on with my child? So what I often hear parents say in my sessions, my kid will only eat Doritos, goldfish crackers. My child always gags and throws up. They might stuff their food in their mouth as much as possible and then choke. Refusing specific food groups, maybe they don't have a lot or a wide range of fruits and vegetables, and maybe they start to lose their foods that they once loved. When this happens, parents might end up with a disorganized and stressful mealtime experience, understandably. Feeding your child when they can feed themselves might be a habit that comes into play. Unfortunately, sometimes we force feed because parents, the only thing you want for your child is for them to eat. You might end up sneaking new foods or ingredients, which if you know any child with autism, I mean, they're extremely observant. And if you do that and they notice, there might be a lack of trust or hesitancy there. You might end up offering rewards for eating, and then your child ends up expecting a piece of cake after everything that they do. And then you might have an issue with distractors, such as the iPad or keeping the TV on during mealtime, making it really, really hard to interact and engage with your child. Here's the definition of pediatric feeding disorder. I'm going to just kind of graze over this because there's so many aspects to feeding and there's so many individual preferences and difficulties that children with autism have. But it's important to know that this is what pediatric feeding disorder, the actual diagnosis, is defined as. And let's talk about the 4 domains of pediatric feeding. So there's the medical domain, nutritional, the feeding skill, and the psychosocial. Whoops, I'm going way too fast, 1 second. So it's really, really crucial to rule out any medical problems or medical difficulties that your child might have. Like the statistic said before, only 3% of feeding disorders are actually behavioral. So we have 26 different muscles that are involved in feeding and 6 cranial nerves. If all of those aren't harmonizing, then we're likely to see difficulties with feeding. It's really, really crucial that we're working with experts and professionals that can rule out any of those medical difficulties. For example, a child might have chronic constipation. That is a very, very common report for kids with autism. It's really, really important to maybe get a gastroenterologist involved and do some testing there. So many of our kids can't communicate exactly what they're feeling. And we need to rely on that assessment piece and also be able to consult with those professionals that can give us their expertise in that area. Symptoms like, respiratory distress. So maybe you're hearing your child wheezing after they swallow, or excessive coughing. Maybe your child vomits or regurgitates after they swallow or eat. All of those are signs and symptoms of something that we need to rule out medically. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is things like food allergies with kids with autism. Food allergies are incredibly common and really do need to be ruled out, especially if you're noticing excessive fatigue, rashes, any kind of reaction when you do see your child eating specific foods. High sensitive foods are eggs, milk, gluten's a big one, soy, wheat, and so on. The feeding skill area is another important piece when we're looking at pediatric feeding disorders. So understanding, does my child have a problem with their skill development? A huge area for this is for children with autism in general is, are they developing overall with their core strength? We can get into that a little bit more later. Does your child have the postural stability when they're eating to hold themselves upright? Can they stay alert? Are they able to chew and not pocket the food in their mouth? And I'm going to turn off my video because I'm getting kind of a delay when I try to click forward. So in that feeding skill domain, we need to look at, your child's body positioning, their muscle tone, postural control, the way they are tolerating the different textures and tastes, and then their motor skills that allow them to effectively bite, chew, swallow, and enjoy their food. In the nutritional domain, getting nutrients from the foods that we eat is an absolutely fundamental need that we have for proper brain development. So food allergies, like we said before, sensitivities, metabolic disorders, the excessive food selectivity, all place our kids at risk for dehydration, weight loss, growth issues, etc. The last domain is the psychosocial domain, and it's the one I feel is often forgotten as our kids with autism start to develop, and we might see some success in therapy. Maybe they had, physical therapy or occupational therapy when they were younger. So we're not as focused on making sure mealtime is a positive experience because they seem more independent. But we still see that these big issues keep coming up, like food refusal or avoiding mealtime altogether. Maybe your child has excessive anxiety surrounding mealtime and might throw a tantrum. These are all things that might be signaling an issue that your child is unable to express independently. So making mealtime a really positive experience is a huge fundamental skill that we need to bring back to feeding for kids with autism. So let's talk about the team of professionals that might be helpful to your child. A developmental pediatrician is crucial because they're experts in growth and development. They often make appropriate referrals a little bit quicker than a regular pediatrician might, or a regular family physician, family medicine doctor might. And that's really important when it's time sensitive. A speech therapist can help with oral motor strengthening, biting, chewing, and then the swallowing piece if there are issues. An occupational therapist can address the motor skills that impact your child's ability to have a successful mealtime experience. So remaining upright, being coordinated enough, appropriately responding to the sensory input that's coming their way when they are tolerating a new food. Another person that is really important is the nutritionist or the registered dietitian. Especially if your child has the really limited options of different foods, they can actually provide some strategy, recommend the optimal nutrient dense foods that can help your child continue to grow, gain weight, and they can monitor the caloric intake. Other professionals who might be involved, the gastro team for digestion, acid reflux, motility or moving the food in your body down to the stomach, an allergist, social worker, psychologist, and BCBA are also really important team members to support your child. So here, this is actually a list that I go by in my practice. So this may not be an all-encompassing list for every provider, but this is mine. So some symptoms that your child might need feeding intervention is if mealtime exceeds 40 minutes. That's a huge red flag to me that they may need some oral motor strengthening or oral motor input. Maybe they need some help with postural stability to be able to remain upright and then ultimately stop holding the food in their mouth and not become so fatigued. A huge symptom is poor weight gain, right? Reduced or slow to gain weight or excessive weight gain. Eating fewer than 12 foods. Also, maybe your child, this is very, very common, will only prefer one food group. So starches is a huge, huge preference. And if we think about starches, a lot of them are more bland. They give you that nice crunchy input when you're eating. So you know where that Dorito is in your mouth. And they're all relatively the same in sensory properties. So they all look the same. They might taste the same or similar. They're usually cheese, or honestly, the only one I can think of right now is cheese, but there are many more. I might see a child mouth stuffing a lot. So they literally look like a little cartoon character, the way they're eating their food so quickly, and just munching, munching, munching. They're not really chewing their food all the way. They have a huge, huge amount of food in their mouth. Maybe they're swallowing food whole if it's soft enough without chewing. If they're pocketing foods and holding food in their mouth. Also, if they're no longer accepting foods that they used to love. And then, of course, the increased anxiety, avoidance, or irritability approaching mealtime. So important comorbidities to remember that influence your child include the comorbidity of epilepsy and seizures with autism spectrum disorder. Dr. Law from North Shore Pediatric Therapy is a neuropsychologist, and she did a great presentation in October about this. I believe that is posted on the Chicago Autism Network website, but I actually learned a lot there about the prevalence of seizures with kids with autism. And seizures are neurological, and they affect the brain in different ways that we may not be able to pinpoint unless we get specific testing. So it's important to understand that as your child ages, you're checking in with any neurological symptoms that you might see that are consistent with that. Sensory processing disorder. So the way your child organizes input that's coming to them, the way they tolerate or experience taste, temperature, sight, smell, touch. A lot of kids with sensory processing disorder, and while they're eating, those are the kids that might gag because the sight of a food is just too much for them, or the scent of a food is just too much for them. There might be some psychiatric comorbidities like ADHD, maybe even some PTSD. So a traumatic experience when your child choked on food and just that stayed with them. Also, of course, food allergies. So every time they eat a certain food, they have a certain reaction or something that they're not able to articulate to you. And then chronic sleep disruption. So if your child's unable to heal through sleep, those are all things that can influence feeding, especially because your child might become even more fatigued. Okay, feeding milestones by skill. So a lot of people that are attending tonight probably already have a child who's diagnosed with autism. And it's really, really important to, of course, know when feeding milestones should be achieved by. But another thing to know is when your child and in what order, what do they need to successfully eat or feed? They need undisrupted respiration. So being able to breathe while they're eating and coordinate that, which is really important, especially if they're infants, is huge. That is what our coughing reflex is for, is to protect our respiration. We need to have developed gross motor skills. So gross motor are those large muscle groups such as our core, trunk, tummy, our legs and arms, and then fine motor skills. So the development of those really small muscle groups for movements like picking up our food, picking up a Cheerio and putting it in our mouth, chewing the Cheerio, and successfully using our tongue to eventually swallow the Cheerio. Motor coordination. So can your child reach across their body? Do they have the hand-eye coordination for feeding? And sensory integration. So integrating all the incoming senses, remaining calm and organized, and having an appropriate response so we can continue to enjoy our food. So this is one of my favorite handouts from Pathways. This shows what motor milestones usually coincide with feeding abilities. And if we think about this, this really highlights the importance of your child having appropriate strength overall or tone overall to be successful at mealtime. Also, I just want to say Pathways has some amazing, amazing resources that you can reference just like this. This is just one of them that I often hand out to parents. Can we guess the number one overlooked skill in feeding? And that would be gross motor development. So as our kids develop, their capabilities are completely reliant on those large motor movements to developing the small motor movements for feeding. So it's interesting, when I see a child that can't walk yet, I know that they're not going to have a lot of success with chewing. They're still probably going to be on those really, really soft solid foods or puree foods. All of this highly correlates with the development of the large muscle groups. The stronger the core muscles, the more control that your child has with their head and neck, and ultimately their mouth for chewing and swallowing. Okay, before we start with strategies, really quickly, I just want to talk about why strength from the core and sitting upright is so important. So when we're sitting and eating, we should be at a 90-degree angle at our hips, at our knees, and at our ankles, and our feet should be on a flat surface. When our feet are on a flat surface, that offers that extra stability for us to control and remain upright. So the more stability that we have, the more motor control we have. And if we think about our kids with autism, they're often low tone. So therapy should really have those supports in place so that way your child can compensate for any of that low muscle tone. So implementing strategies, where do I start? Reflecting on your current mealtime routines is probably the biggest thing you can do right now. Even if you think you don't have a routine, you absolutely do. You know, when my husband and I first moved into our house, we started eating dinner in front of the TV. And that was not a positive mealtime routine, right? That's probably the only time we have to sit across the table from each other after a long day of work and talk about our experiences and enjoy food together. So if we take that back to a child with autism who really, really needs to have that social engagement and interaction, routines like mealtime and bath time, routines like mealtime though, are really, really crucial to getting them comfortable. So take a minute right now to just consider all of the different routines or cues that you have for your child during a mealtime. So maybe pick dinner. Consider right now, you know, what time is your dinner? What room is dinner in? Has dinner accidentally joined everyone in the living room? Are you guys allowing for dinner to occur outside of the kitchen or not at a table? What furniture is used? Is your child in the appropriate seat they need to be so they have proper positioning? And then who is involved, which unfortunately has been such a challenge for so many families lately. We're all under so much stress, but is there a way that your entire family can come together to the dinner table and be together for mealtime? What utensils are used? And then, of course, what foods am I actually presenting to my child? Are they getting exposure to the same 5 foods because they've refused them so many times? What are your child's habits surrounding mealtime? And I've seen so many different habits. I've seen kids that will run up to the refrigerator and just rapidly press the ice dispenser, creating absolute chaos. Really look at all of those different habits that we've allowed during mealtime. And next, we're going to talk about how we can structure our mealtime experience so that way it's successful and it actually reduces the anxiety that might come with mealtime. Also, like I've mentioned a few times, we want to make sure mealtime is positive. So if we're introducing new foods, that we're modeling in a positive way. We are playing with our food. We're singing songs. We are modeling and saying, this is good, with no pressure to try it. We're not asking our kids, do you like this? Because if we do that, and obviously a lot of the time our kids won't like it at all. They don't want to let you down in any way. So in what way can we present foods in a way that makes our kids laugh and has them open to the mealtime experience? So back to preparing for optimal positioning. At the table, we want to make sure that our kids are positioned at 90, 90, 90 to avoid the slouching, sinking down in their chair, or constant adjusting that might come with mealtime. And the reason I put this before everything else when we're jumping into establishing good habits for a mealtime routine is because I truly feel like this is the #1 thing that's missing from so many families' households. It's an adjustable feeding chair. And after the presentation, I have a list of resources that Kimmy can send out to everybody that will include some recommendations for feeding chairs. Of course, if you think your child needs one, I do recommend that you start the process for a feeding evaluation, especially with an occupational therapist, so you can actually get their recommendations on optimal positioning. Positioning is so important for that motor control. So, establishing a mealtime routine. We can make this really, really fun. First, though, we need to make sure that our kids are eating at the same time each day, that we're limiting their opportunities to graze. We're not letting them snack, or I shouldn't say that, not letting them snack. They can have snacks, but we should schedule our snacks, right? We want to control the appetite and actually build the appetite for your child with autism, especially if they have sensory processing disorder, because they may not be even aware, or they may not be actually feeling the cues that their body's giving them. A big important thing you need to do is start off with preparing your kid for mealtime. So what activities can we do that signal it's time to eat? And we can, again, make this super fun. So we're marching and singing to wash our hands. You can actually have your kids push their chair to the sink to get up and wash their hands, to give them some input, having them help set the table so they're getting involved with the tasks and routines of mealtime. And I have already covered getting your chair ready. You can also give them little jobs like, here, give a napkin to everyone. All of those things can help regulate and prepare them for, okay, this is a routine and I'm ready to eat. Another part of the mealtime routine is to present their preferred foods first. A lot of parents hesitate with this part. And it's because, well, if my child doesn't eat the new food, then, or if my child eats their preferred food first, maybe they're not going to want to try a new food. But we, again, want this to be a positive experience. So they can have their preferred food, and maybe we limit the quantity at first, or we allow them to choose. So we're giving them some participation. It's important that, as we said, we want every family member to join in our mealtime routine or join us for at least one meal. And everyone models eating the food with no pressure to eat, but everyone models it. And if your child does happen to take a bite of that food or explore that food with their hands or smell that food, we want to make that a really exciting moment and we celebrate it. We also don't want to talk too much about, oh, that food was icky or we didn't like it. It takes 25 plus times for a child to actually decide if they like or dislike a food. And I think a lot of us as adults have experienced this as we've gotten older, right? Maybe you hated mustard when you were a kid, but now you love mustard. Or I know onions is a big one. And those are both extreme flavors. So you need a ton of exposure to that one food to decide if you like it or not. It's really, really important that we don't let our kids with autism food jag. So we're not just presenting preferred foods to them. We continue to present foods and we continue to model foods, even if we think our child will not like them. Use a later plate. So a lot of times in feeding therapy, my kids will have their plate with foods they will allow on it, but then there will be another food that's new to them that we can put next to their current plate and have it be something so it's in their space, it's in mealtime, but we're not necessarily requiring them to eat it, or it's not touching other foods. And then assigning a cleanup routine for the child. So they're participating in clearing their plate or throwing their food away. Even giving their food to mom or dad to try. So using a utensil to move it to mom or dad's plate. So we want to continuously present foods to our child. Micro progress is progress. And a quick tidbit, allow 3 days between food presentations to see if your child has a reaction or a sensitivity to a food. While we're doing food exploration, that can look like so many different things. So introducing foods through play, maybe it's not during mealtime. Maybe we want to make a paper plate person and use noodles for their hair or blueberries for their eyes. We can do mashed potato paintings or finger paint with yogurt. It's okay to be messy, and we actually want to encourage our kids with autism to explore foods and get messy. And as a parent, you can encourage that. You can encourage that by not wiping their hands and face immediately after feeding. Okay. So at this time, we can stop recording, Kimmy, and open the floor up for some questions.